So welcome back to the Straight Friendly Podcast. We're here on our second episode about LGBTQ plus tourism. We're continuing this episode after we had the first part where we were talking together with Ed Salvato about his story, about generally moving from content creation and making tourism generally about LGBTQ plus tourism. And also here now in this second episode, we will tackle some really interesting stuff. For instance, how can we give a much better customer service for the LGBTQ plus clients? Lots of thoughts and ideas that I have to admit that I didn't think about before recording that episode. And also we will see about the different needs or willingness of men or women tourists. For instance, about do people prefer to have attention or to avoid an unwanted attention? Also about the difference of the habits of planning the trips. For instance, do we plan it a lot or are we making something which is more spontaneous? And also the whole issue of the queer family. Today in some countries we can bring children, luckily. So the whole needs of the family and the service, we see lots of special needs and ways where we can improve the satisfaction of our clients in a much better way. And we'll also deal what makes tourism to be an LGBTQ plus, lots of topics. And join us for this fascinating second part of this episode with Ed Salvato. So Ed, I would love if you can explain about the differences between men, women, or any other identities of how they consume tourism.
There's a lot of research in how men, women, and other identities choose tourism and hospitality products. Probably one of the most significant differences, and I saw this in my book that I wrote and researched extensively. Women tend to consider themselves as women first. They consider their identity first, and the biggest consideration is safety. Will my partner and I, will we be safe where we travel? Will we have unwanted additional attention because we're together as two women, and not only the attention that most women get that's unwanted, but this additional attention. So women, lesbian women, women who identify in the LGBTQ community, tend not to come out while they're traveling. They tend to let people assume that maybe they're traveling with their sister or their mother or just a girlfriend, because again, they're considering their safety. They're also considering women couples are more likely than gay male couples to have children as part of the family. Oftentimes, this is because of a previous heterosexual union. So the incidence of children is higher in lesbian couples than in gay male couples. How does that change the equation? People who travel with children, whether they're heterosexual or in the LGBTQ community, tend to prioritize the children's needs when planning travel. So for women, there are a few factors: the presence of children, the desire to not attract undue attention, and also financial. Women still in the United States make less money than their male counterparts. So two women together, especially one with children in it, have much less income in their household than heterosexual or than gay male couples. Gay male couples, even though gay men tend to make possibly less than their heterosexual male counterparts, oftentimes because they self-select out of the highest paid industries because of discrimination, lawyers, hedge fund, high level business. Gay men tend to make a little bit less than their heterosexual male counterparts. But because there's two gay men together with no children, that's probably one of the most desirable segments of travel. So there's a lot of difference financially and structurally, but also the way LGBTQ, say women and male travelers, research and choose products. Gay male travelers tend to be, this is a lot of research that I've done. Gay male travelers tend to be more spontaneous. They travel more frequently. They spend more money when they travel. And there's other behaviors that are very appealing to travelers. They don't tend to do as much research as women. Women tend to do a lot more research. It turns out that women, even in non-LGBTQ households, women who are part of a heterosexual union and have children, they tend to make 65 to 70 or more % of all the travel decisions and travel purchases. So women are the ones that smart marketers market to, except for gay male travelers. They're the only ones that don't involve a woman doing research and purchasing travel products. Big difference and very interesting.
So again, can you explain about the difference, let's say, among, women in a heterosexual family or a gay family?
Right. So picture, sir, first, a heterosexual family typically includes a man and a woman and children. That's what marketers are looking for, and that's the kind of most common configuration of families.
So will they market more towards the women or men?
They market more towards the women. Why? Because women tend to make all the decisions. They're the ones who do the research. They're the ones who, in consultation with their families, decide, hey, this is the destination we should go to. This is the hotel that I like, and can I get approval from the husband and the kids? This is just sort of very typical. So it's 65, 70, or even higher percentages. Women make the decisions. So with two women, oftentimes you get two women together in a lesbian relationship, both doing the research and both. So there's it's very research heavy. It's very, they want to make sure they're going to have fun, that they're going to like it, but they want to make sure they're going to be safe. They want to see what other women say about it. So they tend to do a lot of research. So smart marketers put a lot of research against this, and they create a lot of content that will be appealing and catch the eye of the women who are doing all this research. Gay men travelers also, of course, do some research, but they tend to travel more spontaneously. They have the budget to travel more frequently, and they spend more money when they travel.
And you also, in the break, we were talking between us that many times when there were different crises, the gay men travelers were the first to come.
Very interesting. So in my brief 25-year career, I've now seen 3 major calamities that have struck travel and caused travel to pretty much stop, right? There are lots of calamities that happen regionally or locally. Terrorist attacks, wars, disease outbreak. We see this all over the world all the time. But in terms of global travel, after 9/11, travel just stopped. People were very afraid to travel. In the Great Recession, about 10 years later, 2008, 2009, the stock market crashed. It was almost a depression. People were very scared. Financially, people were very nervous about their own wealth and their own income and their own job stability. Stopped traveling. And then again, 10 years later, pandemic. That was pretty much the government mandating that travel stop. And it's been still very difficult to get out of that. 3 years later, we're just still, China still hasn't come back to the United States. So it's still in a pandemic situation. But each of those times, research has shown that LGBTQ people, specifically gay male travelers, self-identified gay male travelers and gay and lesbian travelers, were the first back. They were much more likely to just get on a plane, to get in a car and go traveling. There's a few reasons for this. They tend to be more resilient, economically resilient. So if you have 2 men with no children, both earning an income, even if one loses their job, they still have the second redundant income. So income is typically not a problem. Revenues aren't a problem. Savings accounts aren't a problem. And what they do is they prioritize their expenditures. So instead of buying this year's Prada shirt, they forget it, put off the Prada purchase for another couple of years, and take that trip. So LGBTQ people, especially gay men, tend to prioritize travel purchase decisions over all other, after they meet their basic needs of income, of rent, mortgage, food, those kinds of things. Travel is a huge priority. So the other one I think is a little bit more abstract and a little deeper down in the psyche of queer people. Queer people have had terrible, abusive hostility and all sorts of bad situations occur to them for the entire time they've been queer people. Hostility, abuse, discrimination, whatever. So the vague threat of another terrorist attack isn't enough to deter a gay person from traveling. They've seen worse, they've received worse, and they're still a very resilient, joyful group of travelers. Right after 9/11, we're talking October of 2001, gay people were seen back. And then we saw what happened with marketers, American Airlines, Marriott Hotels, that's when they started really emphasizing the LGBTQ market, especially gay male marketing at that time. The next big bump after the Great Recession, and then after that we saw that again with the pandemic. But another hugely important step in terms of marketing, it's a little bit different from what I'm talking about, but it's also very important, is the legalization of gay marriage. So when same-sex marriage became the law of the land, then organizations, marketers, destinations, attractions, hotels, they felt like they could legally and safely sell honeymoon packages, and so those kinds of travel opportunities didn't exist before same-sex marriage. So the legality of same-sex marriage,
which was around
2015 in the United States, was a huge driver of business because conservative people throughout businesses, and most business people are pretty conservative, they just felt comfortable. Oh, if this is the law of the land, we can promote this safely. Even if people complain, conservatives complain, doesn't matter. It's now legal. So we can sell legal honeymoons to same-sex couples.
And maybe the fact that there was some legal change in the US that affected the capital and the businesses with outcomes also in other countries. And I think this always shows that part of the queer activism is not necessarily only by changing the law, but we as communities, the way that we can use our capital and our decisions making is a power.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely true. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you also, just before we'll finish, about your book that you created with for Colombia, right? So
yep.
I see that you're also a content creator. So how do you see the book, and say, was it academic or non-academic? I know that now you're also working on some academic research, but I think that book was before. I would love if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked on that with my late friend, Jeff Garcino, who sadly died at the end of 2021. But he had written a book on LGBTQ travel. It was really gay travel, gay tourism marketing, several years prior to ours. We worked on ours from 2015 and published it in 2017 through Columbia University Press. It's not an academic book, though it was constructed like a textbook so that teachers could assign it in university and colleges, which they did, which many did. But mostly it was used by master's candidates who were very interested in writing their thesis on LGBTQ tourism. What I found super interesting was every conference Jeff and I went to, people came up to us and said, oh, this one young man said, I am a student of tourism in Chile, in Santiago, Chile, and I wanted to do my thesis on LGBTQ tourism using your book, and they said no. So I fought them, and I was able to do my thesis on this because I won my case, and I fought them. So we heard that a lot, actually. So there's someone in Israel, there was this guy in Ecuador, this guy in South Africa. So it was all over the world, young people were using that book. That's probably, for me, my favorite legacy. We didn't make a lot of money in that book. But it still costs $85. So the price hasn't plummeted, which is good. So it's a standard. One of the reasons we did it was there was no good core basic case studies on what to do to succeed in the LGBTQ tourism and hospitality marketing space. It just didn't exist. There were a lot of bad practices, and a lot of the bad practices were just people who self-claimed experts who talked about their experience. I call that me-search. But what we did was research. We talked to dozens and scores of people. I have 25 recorded interviews. We spoke to 75 people at some level, but we conducted 25 deep interviews like this. Interviews with people who are experts in the industry. Gay people, straight people, men, women, all different kind of people who were succeeding, what they were doing, why they were doing it, what they would call success, what advice would they give to other people doing this. So it's an excellent book, and it's fairly evergreen. I think that it's still valid today, even though it's been 6 years since this book. So that was a great experience and important. That also helped me pivot into teaching.
It leads me to probably my last question. That, I see you as an entrepreneur. and talking about teaching, and there's a lot of role modeling here, and I'm sure that for our listeners, they can learn a lot from your experience, not only the professional one, but also the personal one. And I wanted to ask you if you can tell us a bit and give us a few tips to any of the listeners about, first of all, about making business within the communities. Like, I'm sure that what you do is your passion. Otherwise, it's impossible to deal with such with this content. And you also did a huge pivot with your business, and you told me that today, if I can say that, that you these days you making much more money than you did in the past, and maybe this is some information that we can share with our listeners.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So,
and I also personally would love to learn.
Oh, good. I'm happy to share that. A lot of things. So, when I was working in market research, those market research companies, I was very unhappy in a corporate environment. So that was one thing about me. I don't like a corporate environment. I don't like evaluations and targets and all this kind of stuff that I know you're supposed to do in marketing, and I advocate you do that. But for me personally, I didn't like meetings, and I just like to work. I like to do stuff. I'm a doer. I try just not to waste my time or other people's time. I just hate the corporate world. It's just so, like, I always joke that for my evaluation, if I had to self-evaluate, I would just say 3 words: you are welcome. That was my self-evaluation. You're welcome.
What do you mean?
I did such a great job. You are welcome. I assume you're saying thank you. You are welcome. So yeah, I know that sounds silly, but it's just me. I don't like corporate environments. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing was I was really struggling with what I want to do with my life. I just don't want to waste my life. I don't want to go to meetings and go to a 9-to-5 job and just work at a desk. Like, what am I doing? I wanted to do something that was meaningful, had impact. So what I loved was I had been traveling my whole life outside of work. So I would just work and then work to travel. And I was traveling. What I love to do was travel and tell people about my trips. So I like to tell my students, figure out that epiphany. Like, what is that you really love to do? Like, that took me a long time to get to that. I love to travel and tell people about my trips. So, but that doesn't give you enough information about what you should do, right? That just means you should keep traveling and tell people about your trips. But what are you good at? I'm a good writer. I'm very organized. I can tell a story. I can get to the most important aspects of something and relate those to you. I can boil something down and give it to you in 200 words and 1,000 words and in 3 words, whatever it is. Oh, I'm a good writer. I'm a good organizer. So then when you start thinking, I love traveling and tell people about my trips, and I'm a good writer and I'm good organized, travel right. And then when I met this guy, Billy, in Provincetown, who was offered to, and I said, hey, I'd love to write for you. I showed that I could be a travel writer. And then that kind of one thing led to the next. So it was like following your passion, but also combining that with your skills. So you have to kind of know what your skills are and you know what your passions are, right? That's a good combination. The other thing that's maybe unique is that since I hated working, not hated, but I just felt like something like uncomfortable working in a straight environment. I was kind of out, but not really out. And, I worked in a very progressive bank in a market research position at a bank in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the big boss was gay, and they asked me to do this very interesting project in 1996, where I was like doing a diversity, equity, inclusion project in 1996 in Boston, Mass. That's so far in advance. The HR person was an openly lesbian person, awesome, who was leading a DE&I effort. That was so far ahead of its time, but that's Cambridge, Massachusetts. But even that, I just felt bored because everything was so straight and corporate. Everyone was going home to their suburbs and their husbands and wives and kids, and it bored me. I wanted to scream, there has to be a better way. So then I worked for a gay company, and I've, up until 3 years ago, the pandemic, I've only worked for gay companies, and that's awesome. It's a good environment. You just assume that everyone's gay, and then you don't have to worry about it. It's good. We worked for a big company, planned it out, that had 130 employees, maybe even more at its peak. And we used to whisper about, I think that guy's huge. It was huge. It was the first publicly traded gay company. The ticker was LGBT. It traded on NASDAQ, and then it was delisted because it failed because of mismanagement. But
it's so surprising for me. I was sure that the first business to get to NASDAQ, like LGBT business, was Grindr.
No, you got to look it up. The ticker was Plan It Out. It's on Wikipedia. And I loved working for that company. You would kind of go like, oh, look at that new guy. Oh, I heard he's straight. Like, it was very funny because it was San Francisco, straight people, gay people. It's very open. So I like working for gay companies. I think that's, and how can you, if you're a listener and you're like, oh, I'm not gay, I don't know what that means. I think it's just find your tribe, that you want to spend I realize, oh my God, I'm spending more time with these people than my family, my partner, my mom. So you want to spend time with people you care about, right? And then I just cared more, and I loved working in a queer environment. That's really fantastic. It's very special too.
And what about the pivot that you had to do, like during the COVID crisis?
Pivot, yeah. So it was like the picture, if you want to get it in your head, is I was on a ship that was sinking and I stepped on a ship that was floating. So essentially, so that ship sank. So I had a business for 9 years with my business partner, Billy. And the ship wasn't sinking, but the pandemic just stopped everything. And our business was travel guides, LGBT sensitivity trainings, in person conferences, speaking at conferences, all that just disappeared. So there were 3 of us. We didn't need 3 people. Also, it was time for me to move on. There was some conflict and I was ready. So we amicably divorced, and he went his way with the third person. I went my own way, but I had 0 revenues that year. But I had started teaching at NYU, just one course. I thought I'd just do one course a year just for fun. And then that turned into a full-time job because it was initially in person, and then it went to a Zoom-enabled remote. A lot of people, not even my age, younger than me, but people my age and older, quit because they couldn't deal with it. So I was able to just think, oh, I'll take that. So I took all their courses, a lot of courses. So now I teach full-time most of the year for NYU, and I teach another course at University of Texas once a semester. But the teaching has been fantastic. So, it gives you all sorts of stability. It's a good academic environment. It's a good environment to be in. It's 401k. It's good pay. It's, I'm doing an interesting research project with a colleague. Like, it's a great environment and very supportive and very open to the LGBTQ thing. It's not quite a gay environment, but it's completely open and accepting of LGBTQ people.
But do you teach about general tourism, or you get also into...
I teach, my classes are all general for the most part, general tourism and hospitality, marketing for the most part. But I teach diversity, equity, and inclusion in almost every class that I teach. Even today, I just started my summer classes, and it's a general marketing class. And I spoke to my students, and we talked about advertising, and we talked about, bias in advertising, or, I asked them to Google travel images, and what do you get? Oh, what a surprise. Mostly white, young, able-bodied people, heterosexual with 2 kids. Do we see a lot of wheelchairs? Do we see a lot of black people? No. So it's just simple, simple stuff that I just try to point out all the time. I don't just do 15-minute gay once a semester. I weave all that stuff in. And since I can't speak really for women or transgender, but I have a lot of guest speakers come in. And I joke that I've had like, say, 100 guest speakers over the course of 4 years come into my various classes. I would say probably 3 are white heterosexual males. For the most part, I have women or Asian people or people from different countries. I had a woman from Salesforce who just happened to wear a headscarf. So that was just a lot of diversity, just incidentally, So I just like that, being inclusive in my classes, to model that kind of behavior for my students so they see another way to be,
Talking about academics, is there any institution or institutions that you know about that they have specifically LGBT studies, departments or LGBT business studies?
Such a good question. Yes, I think there's this supposed master's in Barcelona, but I think it's asynchronous, meaning self-guided. I think it's online, self-guided. So I'm not 100% sure about that. We attempted to launch a gay LGBTQ travel tourism class. No one seemed to be interested in it. So we started afresh. And I had a different idea. I said, I proposed this class, and then it was accepted, and I created this class, and we launched it in January. It went really, really well. Initially, I'm calling it Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Hospitality and Tourism. So the idea is, it was only a 6-week class, short 1.5 credit instead of 3 credits. So we talked about LGBTQ, disability, African American, solo women travel. We talked about various underrepresented segments. And then I created and provided a framework that was in place of a textbook. So a framework for thinking about how do you welcome diverse travelers. So they went so well that the school administration asked me to expand that to a 14-week 3.0 credit class. So that's what I'm launching in September. So as far as I know, it's the only one of its kind in the world.
The one in Barcelona.
The one, no, that I'm teaching.
That you're teaching.
The Barcelona one, I don't think it's worth, I don't know anything about it. But my class is very interesting. And I've heard some students said the reason she decided to come to NYU is between NYU and some other program was because of the diversity, equity, and inclusion class. So I'm going to call it something different than DE&I, I think, in the future. I think we're going to call it inclusive hospitality. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit different. It's not saying LGBT, it's not diversity, equity, inclusion, which I think no one understands what that means anymore. Those are almost meaningless words. But inclusive hospitality, I think it's more evident what that means. And that will just kind of reposition that course for 2024 a little different. So I'm very excited about that class. I think it's the only one of its kind in the world.
I believe that like these days, what I also know about in terms of academics and related to LGBTQ plus communities is mainly about gender studies.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a matter of time until we'll see in the future more and more kinds of studies, especially
once they steal
business.
my course idea. So I think, I'm joking, but I think you're right. This is the thing. This is what you see with gender studies, DE&I, and all this kind of stuff. In our industry, it's mostly relating to HR. That's it. Mine is very different. It's relating to the consumer, the traveler, mm-hmm. and their welcome at the hospitality, with the hospitality provider or within tourism or even while traveling. So it's a really big difference. So what I'm trying to do is teach my students to empower my students to think about non-normative guests and what their specific needs and concerns might be so that you provide a better experience, a more inclusive welcome, and that you build better business. So it leads to better sustainable business and better business outcomes.
Maybe working with the queer communities can be the door opening for many business owners working with
really think if you as a business owner can understand, if you can get your head around how to welcome a queer person, because it's very societally, culturally, some countries, I remember I went to Bulgaria and they didn't even know gay people. They said, no, we have no gay people in Bulgaria. But, of course, Bulgaria. But he was very interested in this. And he said, but I want to welcome you, because he was a waiter on a cruise ship. He goes, I had two men celebrating their anniversary. I wanted to give them special service and treatment. And he goes, I just don't know which is the Mr. and which is the Mrs. But I know at first I was like, oh, but I was like, oh.
That is, he was asking, he showed the interest.
Everyone, hospitality at a high level, luxury, is all about gender norms. The man gets the check. The man gets the wine, taste of wine. The woman they have her jacket, right? It's gendered. So he wasn't asking which is the top, which is the bottom. He was saying, which is the Mr., which one should I think of as the woman, which one? I thought that was a really great question. He wasn't afraid to ask the question. So it was a very elucidating question. It really helped me. It was a pivot for me. Like, oh, I think I understand a little bit better what people are. I'm so in it, I don't think about that. But he was just a straight guy who never met gay people before, trying to deliver great service. It's great.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
It will lead to a ground which is more equal.
Exactly. And then, then he maybe, if he can understand that, despite his taboos, despite the religious, probably in this country, religiously, socially, gay people, you don't talk to them. You don't want them in your job. You don't want them in your house. But he was able to do this. So if he's able to do this in service within the four walls, outside, who cares what he thinks, right? But in the four walls, we care what he thinks. And if he could do that for queers, maybe for two women, maybe for a black couple, maybe for Asians, maybe for people with a headscarf, I don't know. So to me, if you can serve gay people with grace, you can serve anyone with grace, I think.
I think that it's a very interesting insight also to finish with.
It's great. It was profound to me. That moment was profound.
Ed Salvato. Ed Salvato, it was a big pleasure. Thank you so much for being my guest here in this episode.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or actually wherever you will look for us. Just don't forget to subscribe it and give us 5 stars. And you can also check our website at straight-friendly.com.